Welcome to the Andy Staples Show. It's a coaching carousel edition of the show with probably my favorite first-year football coach, Bruce Feldman from The Athletic. If you have not read his piece about coaching his son's flag football team, just stop right now, read it, come back to the podcast later. We'll wait. Don't worry. Also, if you haven't subscribed to The Athletic yet, what are you waiting for? Bruce's story would be a great place to start doing that. Or you can just go to theathletic.com/Andy Staples, $1 a month for your first 6 months. But we're here with Bruce. We're here with Ari Wasserman. We're going to talk coaching carousel because Bruce and Matt Fortuna wrote a great story kind of crystal balling the coaching carousel for next offseason. But it happened in the middle of Jimbo Fisher versus Nick Saban. So we were a little busy on the podcast. So we're going to talk about that and also about Bruce's experience as a coach where he already knew the job was hard, but to realize it's even that much harder. Bruce, are you when we talk hiring and firing coaches now that you've been a high-level championship winning football coach, does it change things for you?
Before we start, I have to say I'm flattered to be on. This is the first time I've ever done any podcasts with the esteemed Ari Wasserman, who's become a cult hero in this. Partial disclosure, he's I think he's blackballed from the Audible just because Stu doesn't want him. But
what? The truth comes out.
What did I do?
It's how you do it. It's not what you do. No. So I'm kidding.
I had to send Ari the clip from Private Parts to get him off the ledge yesterday because our Michigan State episode came out with Colton Pouncey. And there were some Michigan State fans mad that Ari had they wanted me and Colton to sit there and lavish praise upon Michigan State. And Ari brought up the possibility that maybe they might not get every 4- and 5-star recruit that they have coming in on a visit. And that made them, I'd hurt their feelings a little bit. And Ari's like, should I tone it down a little bit? And so I sent him the Private Part scene where Paul Giamatti as Pig Virus is asking
Pig vomit.
Pig Virus in real life, Pig Vomit in the movie. I don't remember why they had to change it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the guy goes, people identify as Stern fans. They listen for an hour and 20 minutes and their biggest reason, they want to hear what he'll say next. And then people who hate Stern, how long do they listen? 2.5 hours. Why? They want to hear what he'll say next. That's Ari.
Yeah, I feel like such a bad person for doubting that Michigan State's going to win a national championship in the next 5 years. But, I feel like also, too, like I listened back to the show and I don't know if I did the best job of explaining my position on it because, I think that people were misunderstanding my pushback.
And Bruce, I want to get your take on this, too, because we were pointing out that Mel Tucker is taking a different tack in recruiting where it's not what Mark D'Antonio did. And it's not really what Mark D'Antonio did in 2016 either. It's Mel Tucker is kind of going out to wherever he thinks the best players are and just trying to get them nationwide. And my point was Mel Tucker knows exactly what a national title roster looks like. So I agree with this philosophy. I don't know that it will work, but I certainly agree with trying it. And the way Ari was coming off was, well, Dabo Swinney did it, but nobody else will be able to do it. So, and my thought was, are you saying, Ari, that they shouldn't even try, which I disagree with? Ari, do you want to clarify that point?
Yeah, what I was trying to say is that I think that it's a progression. I'm not saying that you shouldn't try. I think everybody should try. I've sat on this podcast a million times saying that the program should try to do something different in order to achieve better results. Especially in the Big Ten. I think Notre Dame could try more, and it looks like that they are.
They're not in the Big Ten, but yes.
No, I know, but I'm saying just in the Midwest and stuff, and in Michigan, before they finally beat Ohio State, I thought that there was a chance they could do something to try more and be better. I feel like the ceilings of programs that people have accepted as ceilings aren't actually their ceilings. It's the coach's ceiling. But what I wanted to say about Michigan State is that it seems like it should be building blocks where one class you expand a little bit more and then you get inherently better, as time goes on, and then you become more effective on the national scale. So in 5 years, when we're having a discussion from a further advanced spot in that coach's progression. It doesn't go from 1 year not signing a top 100 player to year 2 signing 10 top 100 players, or going out, because like you can expose yourself and then end up with nobody, and then you're in a worse spot than you were. So it's not. Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
2 questions, or one's a comment, one's a question. So when Mel Tucker first got to CU, I did a story about his recruiting philosophy, and it was, kind of where Andy was talking about a minute ago, where it was very Saban specific on measurables and size. And I just remember thinking, man, you're in Boulder, Colorado. They have not been good in a long time. If you're really trying to hit those measurables in terms of height and weight, you're going to get a lot of really slow, not twitchy guys that, because proximity, because you're going to miss the ones who might hit that will either go to Utah, Oregon, or USC if they're going to stay on the West Coast, or they're just not a lot of them. So you're going to end up with guys who almost none of them fit the measurables. Like they had one they got out of Arizona, and I'm blanking on his name. He was a 6'8", like edge rusher. I don't even know where he's at, because I know he committed there. He might have transferred to ASU or Arizona. I forgot who it was, but like he was one of those guys. But I think ultimately he went to Michigan State. Now this is obviously NIL, you can have some aggressive boosters involved in the recruiting process sort of thing. The other part I wanted to ask you, Ari, is because you covered Ohio State recruiting for a long time, and you predate Urban, was when Jim Tressel was there. And I don't remember this as much, like, 'cause I know he did well in recruiting, but I know he did well in that as much as it felt like Urban got more into Texas, got more into the South. And I know Santonio Holmes was from Belglade, and I know there were players who are not all from that area. But from what you remember, how different was the Ohio State recruiting model emphasis with Tressel, which obviously worked, but like, was that kind of a progression out of it, or where, like looking back, what was that?
Yeah, well, I remember Ohio State, when they were recruiting with Jim Tressel, was 15 guys or 13 guys a class from Ohio, and then a few more from the surrounding states in the Midwest, and then Florida was their big secondary market. And then when Urban Meyer came, it was such a big time deal just from a name recognition standpoint, as somebody who recently won national championships and beat Ohio State pretty good in one of them, where everybody in the country was receptive to Ohio State's sales pitch because he already had that built-in like reputation.
But he did that at Florida, Ari, when he didn't have that, when he was coming from Utah.
But what Urban Meyer did at Ohio State was predicated on being already a made man. Like, I mean, I don't think.
But what I'm saying is, when he got to Florida, he was not afraid to go anywhere to get somebody.
Yeah,
like that wasn't unique to him coming to Ohio State.
That maybe the Mel Tucker comparison is that, and like maybe I'll look back and like Mel Tucker will sign 2 top 7 classes in the next few years, and I'll be like, holy crap, I was wrong. I just remember specifically writing a story like year 4 in Urban Meyer's tenure that they were taking 5 or 6 less guys from Ohio a year on average, which was a huge difference. And it opened the doors in places like like California and Texas, and he went back into Florida a little bit, but they were in other secondary recruiting markets that they weren't in very often before. So
I would argue that it is harder for Mel Tucker, I think, to do what he just did, win 11 games and have a top 10 season at Michigan State after, the previous year. Like, it's a bigger jump to do that than it is to have, you said 7, to have a top 10 recruiting class.
I think that's probably fair.
Well, it's going to be fascinating to watch because, and this was my argument when Urban Meyer got to the Big Ten. I remember writing this column actually after they beat Michigan State in East Lansing in 2012. Pretty sure that was in East Lansing in 2012. But I remember being on the field after the game and thinking the rest of the Big Ten is completely screwed because he's the only person here who actually understands what a national title roster looks like. Like, the other people think they do, but they really have no idea. And that's, I think, where Mel Tucker has somewhat of an advantage.
Yeah. I mean, I went back and I read a few things, and I thought about the way that I put it. And it's like, I know Michigan State fans were very, very wrong, or very, very mad at me, and they think I'm very, very wrong. I just thought that my point was that it might take a little bit longer than, like, this is the recruiting strategy that you arrive at after a few years of success. It's like, A, is it sustainable? And B, do you think that it's like smart to do it right away this way? Or do you kind of start slower, a little bit closer to home, and then expand out gradually? Because like Georgia being the secondary market for them is going to be like a really hard thing to do year in, year out, right?
It's the only one that works, though.
I agree with Ari's point, because if you think about it, just guys in that division, Greg Schiano knows what a national championship roster looks like. He was at Miami when they built it. He was obviously at Ohio State when they were competing for it. Obviously, Mike Locksley has won national titles. He was at Alabama when they were on top. So it's not like these guys haven't, been part of it. I just think it's like the doable aspect of it, where it's like, do you stand at home plate and take a huge swing at a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, knowing you're probably going to corkscrew yourself into the ground, or what happens if you make contact?
You do when you're guaranteed the money.
Yeah,
that's the thing. He gets fired, he gets the money. He keeps the job, he gets the money. So you can take as big a swing as you want, and that is a good way to segue into the story that you and Matt Fortuna put out late last month, Bruce, where you were looking into your crystal ball about the coaching careers. This is not, and it's not these guys are going to be in the hot seat necessarily. It's some people who are going to be in the hot seat, but also some people who could coach their way into bigger jobs, more money, that sort of thing. And let's start with that group and a guy who will come back around when we're talking about Coach Bruce. Dave Clawson fascinates me. I know he was offered Florida State, Michigan State looked at him when they ultimately hired Mel Tucker. He's been very selective when jobs have come along. He's very happy at Wake Forest, but this is a guy who clearly is really good at his job. Is there any way you could see him blasted out of Wake Forest? Like, what type of job would that take?
That's a great question, because as you said, I think Dave Clawson, in a field of people who usually aren't very self-aware at the top of the food chain, because they almost feel like, I can do anything, because they have such a salesman quality. I think Dave Clawson has more self-awareness than most of his peers do, and knows, okay, what would work for me? What would work for my system? Coaching a certain kind of kid, coaching with certain expectations. I mean, he's kind of got that thing rolling now, right? They just had a terrific season, and almost everybody's back, including, one of their best players who didn't get to play last year. They're arguably their top receiver is now going to play. So put all those things in place. I think, remember, and I don't, I know him, but I've never had this part of the conversation. The one place where it didn't go great was that 1 year in Knoxville
as the OC.
When it was Fulmer and things were falling apart around Fulmer. Like, I wonder if he thinks about it and go, you know what? I know when the grass isn't greener. And
he does not want to be the biggest game in town. He does not want to be the celebrity head coach where he and members of his family are getting stopped at the grocery store. That's not his style. So any job like that, I'm sort of crossing out.
And we have this conversation all the time with Mark Stoops of like, what is the best job in college football, right?
Kentucky, baby.
I think Kentucky is a really great job to have, but to, be in a place that you're comfortable with and a place that you feel like you could be long-term and, you're okay with the expectations and, put yourself in a position to actually exceed those expectations and know that's fulfilling for you. I think that's great. I mean, I think that everybody's always constantly thinking about, well, what's the next big job I can get? And what's the next place that I can win a national championship? And how can I become the greatest coach of all time? And it's like, I'm not saying, I don't know Dave Clawson the way that Bruce does, but to me, it's just like, if this is something that he's comfortable with and he wants to be there, I think it's finally a pretty cool thing to see that somebody's content with where they are and knows exactly what the recipe for success is there.
And he's been like, he comes from pretty humble background in terms of small school football, a lot of time in the Northeast. One of the times where he, dipped his toe into the other side of it was in Knoxville. And it was not great. So I don't know. And not, the other part of this was last year, we just had a very active run of big jobs came open. I'm not sure how many big jobs are going to come open in this cycle. So if you're Dave, and you're probably going to come off another top 15 season, I think. What do you look at and say, yeah, this is a better situation for me? I'd be skeptical if he leave. I'm not saying never, but I would be skeptical if there's a job that's going to pull him away.
So other folks who may be able to play their way into a big job, you mentioned Jeff Brom, Bruce, which is an interesting one because he's had a couple really good years sandwiched and then sandwiched in between some not great years. Louisville is always kind of looming out there. We don't know what's going to happen with Scott Satterfield. That place always seems to have some element of chaos around it. You had, the criticism of the athletic director search because they just promoted the interim from internal. It's strange to think that that's still, because Brom, I feel like, should be happy at Purdue. Like, they pay him very well given the results so far. But if he had a big year this year, I feel like he'd be a hot name, not just if Louisville made a change.
Yeah, I mean, and Louisville is the one that I think would be the one to watch if whatever happens with Scott Satterfield. Look, I think Louisville could have a really good season. Their quarterback quietly had a terrific year last year. And I think they, it's interesting with Louisville, to shift gears for just a second, as Ari could attest, they have elevated recruiting branding. They have a big presence on the West Coast. Part of it is the Clarkson, push that has come out of Steve Clarkson, his son going there. And they're an interesting program to watch. As you said, I think both guys are really good coaches. I think that if you asked Louisville fans, who would you want? I mean, that's the home guy. He just, 9 wins last year. Aiden O'Connell's a really good quarterback. And I feel like, he's back. They have a chance to like to me, I think people look at Purdue and it's like, they're never going to go all in the way a bunch of us did when Scott Frost got to Nebraska, and somebody's going to go, oh yeah, Purdue is going to be we can talk about Michigan State in a context I don't know if we're ever going to talk about Purdue.
But the thing is, Purdue could compete for the West title as long as there's a West division, which may only be this year. But another coach you mentioned in this coaching carousel column, which he's a lightning rod, but I don't think you can argue with his results, is PJ Fleck. Like, what if PJ Fleck won the West this year? Would he be the hottest name in coaching?
I don't know. Like, PJ is interesting in that I thought he did, last year was kind of an interesting microcosm of him. They were down like 6 running backs. They still, won a bunch of games, yet they lost to a horrible Bowling Green team.
Yes.
It was like, I think there's some stuff that he does that maybe people, aren't comfortable with PJ's persona, yet I think it's authentic. It's just, you look at it in total. I had a hard time thinking USC could hire PJ Fleck, because when you looked at his record, he had a really good, finish at, in the MAC. And then he's done some good things at Minnesota. And yet his record in the Big Ten is not great. It's okay. And to think that he goes from there to, if, whatever would happen with Jim Harbaugh, obviously, he had a big year, or whatever happened in the USC search, I was just like, man, I don't see, and I think he's a good coach, but I don't see it, in terms of that.
I feel like Matt Campbell would be the one for jobs like that. But I'm done predicting Matt Campbell to leave Iowa State. All it does is make Iowa State fans mad, and it hasn't happened yet. So until it happens, I'm pretty much done with that.
Yeah, short of Matt Campbell winning the Big 12 last year, I mean, USC wanted a really splashy hire. They were fortunate that it worked out with Lincoln Riley. I thought it was going to be Matt Campbell for a while, and then he did not have a great year. It was kind of a little bit of the bloom came off the rose, because I think, they went from being 9 the year before the best ever season. They were, I think, preseason 5 or 6 or 7, and they lost a lot of 1-score games and barely were over 500. I don't know. You look at the jobs, to me, he's similar in regard to like Luke Fickell, where you always hear there's probably only 3 jobs Luke Fickell would really consider. Ohio State, Orion Day's entrenched there. Notre Dame, now, Marcus
Brand new
Freeman's
coach,
entrenched
yeah.
there. Yeah, and Penn State, where James Franklin just signed a long-term deal. So barring one of those guys, hitting the ripcord to go to the NFL, I don't see Luke Fickell leaving, and I'm not sure what Matt Campbell would look at and go, okay, that's definitely a better situation. I don't see Luke Fickell saying, yeah, I want to jump into the SEC. I'm not saying he wouldn't touch it, but that doesn't.
I don't see Matt Campbell saying that either.
No, same thing. Very similar.
So let's talk about some of the ones that may open. And Auburn is top of mind because we spent all of late January, early February talking about essentially Auburn donors trying to create a coup that would allow Brian Harsin to be fired for free. They couldn't drum up a reason and decided not to pay his buyout. So now he's sitting out there. I still feel terrible for Brian Harsin in all this, even though he's going to get paid millions of dollars when he ultimately gets fired. But like this, the whole way it was done stinks. And I just feel bad for Auburn fans that they got to go through kind of a lame duck season now.
Yeah, I mean, you have quarterback change. You just had there's just a lot to unpack. You also have such a volatile booster set there that I feel like it's a long shot for him to win enough to win people over. I'm not saying he's Clay Helton, but because his personality
feels like that.
Much different. Yeah, but there's a weird fit. Clay Helton didn't feel like he fit with USC, where they were never gonna buy in. There were some rocky moments. At least Clay Helton actually had, a really big year at one point where they won a Rose Bowl, whereas I think it gave him a little bit of cover for a little bit. Whereas, here you have a guy who's in a Shark Tank in the SEC West, and you need the boosters to buy in. Like, I think Andy, you and I had talked about this offline a bunch, where like, if boosters don't, want to kind of sabotage you, they have more opportunity to do it now
than ever. Yeah,
right.
It's crazy.
Well, what's that number? What's that number that he would have to win this year to satisfy the boosters? Because, like, from my standpoint and what I'm focused on every day is, I see that Auburn's not very, very much in the mix for really any of the top 100 players in the country. And it's like, to me, if I'm an Auburn fan or an Auburn booster, I'm thinking, well, even if he goes out and somehow miraculously wins 8 or 9 games this year, the long-term impact of what that program is headed for right now with what they're bringing in isn't good enough. I kind of feel like he's kind of in a weird spot right now.
8 games.
I know.
He needs to win at least double digits to win over boosters. I think he needs to win. If he wins 10, I think people go, all right, let's give this guy a chance. If he doesn't get to that, I just think, man, especially if some of these games turn out to be blowout losses, which I think some of them will. I think you're looking at, if he goes 8-4, I don't see that does anything for them to go, yeah, we're going to give him more time.
Yeah, it'll be interesting when Penn State comes in, because you were with me with Audrey for our Penn State State of the Program. It was a pretty lukewarm assessment, and we don't need to go relitigate that, but this feels like kind of a year before the year for Penn State, where you're going to be fairly average by their standards. If they go in there and beat Auburn, I don't like Auburn's chances against pretty much anybody else in the SEC West that's good.
But let's just say the miracle happens and they win 10 games. What about a 10-win season and the recruiting class that's ranked number 31?
They'd still keep him, because if you can win 10 games against this schedule, you are a hell of a coach. Like, it's a tough schedule.
I feel like 10 games is kind of like.
Can we just point this out though? Like, it's not just the SEC West. They not only have they have to play
Georgia every year.
Georgia.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, good luck with that. I mean, Missouri's very average, but that's what you're getting, from the other side, man.
Mm-hmm. And you've got LSU with Brian Kelly coaching them now. You've got Texas A&M. Like, this is a must win for Texas A&M. Like, they have to win this game if you're Jimbo Fisher. Like, you can't be losing. You can't be losing to this team. And that's a crazy place for Auburn to be there, because that's usually we're talking about Arkansas or Mississippi State when we're talking about that. But like, if you're Jimbo Fisher in Texas A&M and your goal is to win the SEC and win and compete for national titles. Like you can't lose to this Auburn team.
Yeah, I would be shocked. Like if he gets 10 wins, he should be national coach of the year.
Yes,
yeah, no, I know, but
100%.
I said 8 though, and everyone's like, "What 8?" I mean, if he wins 8 games in the schedule, I think that'd be a pretty encouraging result.
I agree, but 8 games in a number 31 recruiting class gets him fired. I mean, it because all you have to do, look at Dan Mullen. Similar situation where he was coming off three double digits win seasons in a row. I guess 2020 they didn't win double digits, but had it been a normal year instead of the COVID year, they would have. So he's coming off 3 very good seasons in a row. It was the recruiting that got him. It wasn't necessarily the falling off a cliff last year, because the falling off a cliff happened when it became clear the recruiting was going to get him fired.
Can I ask you guys this? So let's give Mercer, they should beat them. San Jose State, home, should beat them. Let's say Penn State, it's home, should beat them. And they have Western Kentucky, that's certainly winnable. So, fine. Then they have Missouri at home. So that's 5 wins. What are the other 3 wins that you would be like, yeah, I could see them getting these?
LSU, Arkansas, Mississippi State, and A&M would be the ones that you think are coin flips at that point. But you're going to lose some. Like Mississippi State is going to beat a lot of teams that think they're going to beat Mississippi State this year.
I think the question that you ask is the perfect way to frame it. I don't know where I would find the other 3.
I don't know that I find 3 wins in that.
If you find 4 coin tosses and you give them 50-50 shot in either, and then those 4, then you can account for 2, which gets you to 7. And I'm not necessarily sure that the games that we said that they were going to win.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're definitely beating Missouri, and I'm not sure they're beating Penn State. They may beat one of them. I don't know if I'd feel confident they're going to win both.
Yeah, so I don't. Again, it's going to have to be since he does not have the hope of the great recruiting class on the horizon. It's going to have to be wins, and I just don't see how you get enough.
Yeah,
Bruce, can I ask you this, because you're so much more plugged in when it comes to the coaching search stuff, but how much do you think that recruiting classes in general play into the minds of these administrators when they're making these decisions? Like, do you think I overblow it?
I think a little bit, in terms of going into a hot seat. Like, if you could have, like, I think it's worse for the recruits than it is for the boosters, right? I think it's easy to sell it against a school, to say, hey, you don't want to go there because that coach isn't going to be there a year from now, that kind of thing. But I don't know if people look at it and say, like, he could have, like, recruiting rankings are really fickle right now, right? Like, I forgot, like, it might be Northwestern. There's somebody who's in like the top 10 without like a top 300 recruit because they have a bunch of commits, right?
Texas Tech
is number 1, and Cincinnati's number 4. But it's all because
I thought it was Northwestern has like no top 300 ranked players, and they're somewhere in like the top 10. I think at least on 247's number. If
Northwestern's number 6 right now.
And that's my point.
And they don't have a top 300 player. That's right.
Yeah. So when you look at some of those, you're like, okay, let's take some of this with a grain of salt right now, because like where it factors in at this time of year. Now, obviously, nobody thinks Fitz is on the hot seat or anything, but I'm just saying, like, I think people will take the recruiting rankings. You can spin it however you want to spin it for a while. To me, the hardest thing is, like, I don't think if boosters are not believing in the coach, like at one point, like LSU had some big recruits committed to them. That wasn't saving Ed Ogeron.
No, but LSU is a different animal. LSU is one of the few places left where people really do commit to the school. Yeah, and I think LSU and Notre Dame might be the only ones that are that. So I think that's part of it. But I think if you have a few kind of, top 100 type, like, let's say if somebody got Arch Manning, and right now it looks like Arch Manning may go to Georgia, which different animal in that case. But let's say you were a school that didn't typically recruit in the top 10 and you had an Arch Manning type player committed, you might be able to hang your hat on that as a coach to keep your job, or it might make for a good tiebreaker. But I don't think a recruiting class that is typical of your school's normal performance is a job saver.
So let's just say like this hypothetical, and I don't know if the math is perfect here, guys, but I'm very curious what you think. And you're a coach in year 2 of a middle tier program, and you're building towards something. And if you have a disastrous season, you might not be fired, but you're headed towards something. If you're a fan of that school, would you? And I gave a value for each win being 10 spots in the recruiting rankings. What would you prefer to see? More wins in the early beginning part of that person's tenure, or would you rather have those 10 spots? Because like Ralph Russo was texting us the other day about like my take on recruiting rankings versus wins and losses, and he thought it was insane that I thought that I would rather have a higher ranked recruiting class
Yeah,
than
mine's a little
multiple
more
wins.
I agree with Ralph. Because
Mine's a little more nuanced than that. Like I'm about trajectory, which is both, and both figure in. So you're going to satisfy me more if I'm the fan or the administrator. If I hate to say this, if you lose a little up front, but your team gets better and you end on a hot streak. So let's say you have a 7-5 record, but 4 of your last 5 are wins and you're getting some good recruits. Like that is going to give me a lot more confidence than you beat up on a couple crappy teams in the non-conference. You fell off a cliff and and then you have a decent recruiting class coming.
You'd rather be 8-4 with the 27th best than 6-6 with the 17th best. Or
no,
the
it depends
15th
on the
best.
6. It depends on the 6. Like, did you win 4 of your last 6 and have that? I'd rather have that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's all nuanced, but I
Yeah.
feel like the importance of getting players into the program is the hardest part. So like getting multiple
But I
extra
think you gotta be
wins.
careful with how, like, I would point to USC. Like towards the end of Clay Helton's run, he had a top 10 class. I don't know how good a lot of those players are actually going to prove to be.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I think you can't get too caught up in, oh, these guys were ranked this. I'm not saying
This is where having somebody who understands football very well in your administration can help you, because you can star chase and goose a ranking.
yeah.
Like you can get guys who they might not make grades or they don't fit what you do at all, but they've got a high star ranking. Like you can do that.
Because USC is the perfect example of that, because their
USC is
class
perfect
was
example of
awesome.
how it-
Because like
but that I think it's 2021 when it was a top 7
and
or
they had
8
Corey
class.
Foreman in it. Yeah.
Corey Foreman was in it. You had like a linebacker who I think a lot of that staff was not sure how he's going to make an impact.
Rajon Davis, I think.
Yeah, you have guys in there, like even before that, USC had some guys where they had high star ranking and people were like, this guy, it was like they like Andy said, I think they chased stars, and a bunch of those players when they left the program, left early for the NFL, didn't get drafted, or that kind of thing.
USC has also been like notoriously the worst developmental program in college football,
Right.
too.
But
So I wonder how
think
that manifests.
It's
with
one of
what
those things
some of
where
it-
like if you run a 3-4 and you take a very highly rated guy who looks like Geno Atkins, who's a gap shooting 3 technique. Well, you just took somebody who doesn't fit what you do. Like there's no place for him in your defense. So if you know that, if you understand the game, you're going to look at that and go, that person's just chasing stars. They're not trying to make their team better.
Right.
So that's the
you think coaches do that?
Oh, I
coaches
definitely
do
think
that.
coaches do it. Yeah. I think not only this, Ari, and this goes back, I did a recruiting book 15 years ago, and they were even getting paid. Staffers were getting paid for who they signed. The athletic department would give money.
Bonuses based on like rivals in 24/7 rankings.
Yeah. So, and when this, and Antonio and I did a story, about USC after Clay Helton got fired, about, one of the coaches was like, admitted, yeah, like we know how the star system can work, where if you call and get somebody elevated, because it does what you're saying. Like, I definitely feel like from talking to people inside USC that they were hoping, hey, we can showcase Jackson Dart if he plays really well against UCLA on a somewhat of a marquee stage. It will make our job more attractive. It's like it gives people hope. Well, you have to sell something. If you can't sell wins, you sell. But if you can sell wins, you obviously can do that. That's why I would say I think you over and to kind of back up. I don't know exactly what Ralph Russo told you, but I would agree with Ralph. Like it's like wins is one thing. If you don't have wins, then you got to sell something else.
Yeah.
So let's talk about another person who came into his job with an idea that he was going to recruit very well and had a history as a very good recruiter in his previous stops. He has gotten some players who normally wouldn't have gone to his school, but the best ones left already. This is Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech. So Jahmyr Gibbs was sort of the example that here's a guy from Atlanta. I got him. This is going to change everything. We're shifting from the option that Paul Johnson ran, and we're going to run a more conventional offense. And now Jahmyr Gibbs is at Alabama. I will bet you he's the best player who came out of the transfer portal this year in the whole country. And Georgia Tech's lost 5 assistant coaches. Like it looks like the end for Jeff Collins.
So I help one of our colleagues on a state of the program where I, got the scouting report from another assistant or another coach. And this person made the point that a lot of people just assume because of the transfer portal that it is easier to flip a program this day and age. And he said in some ways it's harder because look at the example of by far their best player they had, and he leaves after 2 years because it's just not, you can get up and leave. And that's the problem. How are you supposed to develop a culture when your best players can leave because there's just better opportunity or better circumstance someplace else? They're tired of being mediocre, in this case, less than mediocre, results. And, it was an interesting point to bring up because as you said, Jeff Collins does have a reputation for being a really good recruiter. Yeah. He's been around it. He knows what it looks like. And yet, he got Jeff Sims. Jeff Sims was a big recruiting get for him at the time from Florida State. And he's had some moments, but it's just like, how are you sustaining? And I think anybody would have known to go from what Paul Johnson was running to not that is going to take some time. And hey, he had the franchise running back, but the offensive line has been a challenge, and that's no fault to Brent Key, who had been there before and had been at a lot of places, the O-line coach. But I don't know how patient they can be unless, if he wins 5 games, then okay, that's some signs.
Probably got to upset somebody, but yeah, I mean, that's the only way. And it's a weird job. I had this conversation with somebody a few years ago where I said that the thing a big money donor could do to help Georgia Tech football the most is endow an easy major. Like, because they are in kind of that Notre Dame zone of you can get them in.
It's hard to
keep them there. Right. But here's the thing. It's a big state university. Like there is no shame in having an easy major at a big state university. So somebody endow that degree program and make it happen.
It's an interesting point. I think the challenge for them too, look, it's fortunate, like Auburn, as Ari alluded to, is not recruiting great. That's somebody who's kind of, in your local area. Obviously, we know Georgia's going on full blast now. I just know a lot of guys who've recruited Atlanta who've always felt like this was a sleeping giant program, and have had, really attracted to it. It's obviously a huge city. There aren't that many programs that are in a hot recruiting area that are in big markets.
I would argue that Atlanta and Houston are now the best 2 cities for talent in America, because like Atlanta, and here's the difference between, because I as a Floridian, I know my fellow Floridians are going to come after me on this one, but here's why. Georgia pays its football coaches so much better than Florida does. High school football coaches in Georgia make money. High school football coaches in Florida make nothing. So they actually develop players.
High school coaches in Texas make a lot of money.
They do. But the athletes in Georgia are so plentiful, and there's more coming every day because their population is still booming. And I'm telling you, that is why Mel Tucker is going down there. And that's why you see all these people trying to get into Metro Atlanta. you would think that the school sitting in Midtown Atlanta would be a no-brainer, but it's not. And this is why I say, if they make a move, go talk to Deion. Now, I saw the Jean-Jacques Taylor story in Sports Illustrated where Deion's talking about wanting to have an HBCU renaissance. So maybe he stays at Jackson State. He certainly doesn't need the money. So it's not like this is a money thing for him. But if he wants to prove that he could be a Power 5 school, that's the one I think you put him at.
Well, unless his alma mater doesn't win it.
Right, unless Florida State opens up, which we can talk about if y'all want to. I still think they're in a financial situation that makes it very difficult to make a change. I also think Mike Norvell is probably going to do a little better this year. Maybe that's me just being a little too optimistic, but I look at the way they played for him at the end of last season. It was very promising. You know, nobody quit when they certainly could have, and they got better as the season went on. So I do think they're going to be a little bit better this year. So that's why I'm not just assuming that Florida State opens, but you two may disagree with me on that.
You're a big how did the last season trajectory on the field go guy?
Yeah, did everybody quit on you? Basically,
yeah,
it means something.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just me and my recruiting temperament, but when Travis Hunter flipped from Florida State to Jackson State, it just kind of felt like the air came out of the balloon a little bit. Am I imagining that?
No, it was crushing for them.
I think, like, I feel like where Andy's coming from, I think Mike Norvell is a good coach. He did a really good job at Memphis. A little torn by that because you know who else did a good job at Memphis and it didn't
exactly.
Justin
Fuente.
Yeah. I don't think, and I don't think this was as much a Willie thing as much as it was also Jimbo backsliding too. I think we just didn't maybe grasp how deep of a hole that program was in. And so there's, you know, it's that expression, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. You know, I just think he just doesn't need to take a step back. I think the challenge for him is if Deion keeps elevating.
If he keeps winning double-digit games at Jackson State, I'm sorry. Somebody needs to hire him in the Power 5 or try. And he can say no because obviously he doesn't need the money. So I just you can say it's Deion, it's a whatever. Wins are wins.
If you're Billy Napier, who's the last person do you like?
Deion Sanders.
Yeah. I'm hoping Mike Norvell has a decent year. I'm hoping Mike Norvell goes 7-5, and as long as one of the 7 isn't against me at the end of the year.
Yo, yeah, if you're Billy Napier, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, that's like the perfect sweet spot.
Because you do not want to be sandwiched between Deion Sanders and Mario Cristobal.
No, I agree.
And Billy Napier knows what he's doing, knows what he's going after. I mean, like we said with Mel Tucker, you understand what you're trying to do. It's a matter of doing it now. So it is. That is going to be a fascinating situation.
Even if you take Deion Sanders' profile as primetime out of the equation, and I said, guys, you have to hire a coach, and then there's a coach out there that's at a lower level that won 10 games and got the #1 player in the country to come to their school, regardless of what the tool is. Isn't that an automatic candidate?
Yes, thank you. I feel it now. We're on the same page. So I that's exactly right. Like you name him not Deion Sanders, name him Bob Smith. Doing the same things, he'd be a hot candidate for sure.
Somebody needs to hire Jamey Chadwell out of Coastal Carolina.
Well, that's another thing too. So here's the thing with Jamey Chadwell, that the reason the big jobs have not come along, I will tell you the perfect spot for Jamey Chadwell, because he might have a shot, and I bet he'd do well there. The reason bigger jobs have not looked at Jamey Chadwell is because he's never been an assistant at the Power 5 level, has not had to recruit at that level. He started at North Greenville in Division II as a head coach. He went to the FCS at Charleston Southern as a head coach. He came to Coastal as they were transitioning to FBS. So, and the thing is, most of his staff has been with him the entire time. He would like to keep the core group together if he could, and has managed to so far. So that's the issue. Here's where I think he's got to be willing to deal with the crap, because he's not going to get first pick of the Power 5 jobs. But if Auburn comes open, they're going to be told no by people who are like, I don't want to deal with that mess that Brian Harsin just dealt
Okay,
with.
so give me. I'm gonna throw out
All
two
right.
other names, and you guys
Okay.
each rank them in your order of preference
Okay.
if you're Auburn. Jamey Chadwell, who I know both Andy and I are huge fans of, and I don't know where Ari stands. Hugh Freeze
Mm-hmm.
and Lane Kiffin. Rank them if you're Auburn.
If you're Auburn's administration, you're going to go Lane first.
No, he's asking you.
I'm asking you. I'm asking you, Ari.
I'd go Hugh first because I know he can recruit at that level. And I'm Auburn, so I've dealt with the bad press already, so I can accept that there will be bad press.
Ari?
I think I would go Lane number 1. Am I weird?
No.
Yes, but this is a moot point.
You're weird anyway, but
stick to the topic.
I love what Lane Kiffin's doing in the portal too. Like, I mean, they're going to be a really good team this year, right? Are they going to win 10 games again?
You think?
These are 3 really good options.
Yes. Yeah, you can win with all these.
The thing about Lane Kiffin is that I don't know, he's gone places before and either left very quickly or failed there. And like, I don't know if this is like a new, more advanced version of like a mature Lane Kiffin that knows how to win at a higher level. Because like I've always been like somebody that's been afraid, or I would fret to hire somebody who has already failed at the same level.
Can Auburn get the level of recruit that Ole Miss can't? I think is the question. Now, when Hugh Freeze was at Ole Miss,
he was getting
that level of recruit.
And Treadwell, and he got
Greg Little,
guy,
Laramie Tunsil.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, how much do you think that? So you're just like the negative press thing. You're just we'll just deal with the hurricane.
How much more negative press does Auburn care about? Like, we just savaged them for 2 months because of what happened with them trying to get rid of Harsin. Like, I don't think they care at this point.
3 really good options.
Oh, yeah. But here's the thing. If you can't run Hugh Freeze by your president, which you may not be able to, and Lane, I think he'd take that. But I don't know, because he's got a good job that pays a lot of money. And I don't know you want to deal with that mess. If you're Jamey Chadwell, deal with the mess because you can win there.
Also, like a style thing too. It kind of like makes them entertaining, and people might be more into like watching Auburn.
Jamey Chadwell's the first coach that ever ran the triple option that quarterbacks want to play in. Like, that's an option that quarterbacks actually want to play in, like that throwing quarterbacks want to play in. So, I think.
What's your ranking, Bruce?
I like all 3 options. Freeze is, man. If I looked at it from the perspective of if I was Nick Saban, who's the guy I don't want in Auburn, it's Freeze. Like Andy said, he can recruit.
Mm-hmm.
He's Lane's a great play caller. Freeze is a great play caller. Freeze also. I mean, I've been in the room hearing him talk to players. Freeze there, and I'm not saying Freeze could, I could see Freeze at a Pac-12 school. I could see Freeze in the Big Ten. Freeze there, man. Like, I think he would work. I think he would turn them into a top 10 program. Jamey Chadwell, I'm not as sure. Like, I think he's an excellent coach, and I think but Freeze has done it. Freeze, like, I don't know. I would say I would agree with Andy. It's not a knock on Lane or Jamey Chadwell. I think really highly of Jamey Chadwell. This is like one thought that popped into my head. Andy and I were both in San Antonio for the coaches convention. I remember that after the coaches meetings, like not every coach in the country was there, but probably 50% of them or 60%. And there is a charisma to him that is different than a lot of head coaches. And I think for most people who've not been around him and like in person, you maybe just watch the game, you've seen especially in the pandemic year of 2020, where it was like, I think people were more open to watching the Sun Belt because some weeks that was all there was. I think if you're around him, you're like, oh man, I could see why people follow him. And I can see, there's something to him, like as Andy said, the system is really interesting what they do. He's been able to keep coaches around him. I think he's excellent. It's just
Yeah, it kind of pisses me off that programs that have had openings have, and this is not a case of he's been courted and just said no. Like, they don't even talk to him. They don't even consider. They don't even ask. So I just think they're showing a lack of imagination there. But like Bruce said, and this is why I said Hugh Freeze first. If I'm Auburn, I want to know you can get players. And Hugh Freeze, more than anybody else, has shown you can do that. And in this environment, the stuff that Hugh Freeze was castigated for by the NCAA, well, that's not an issue anymore. What happened on the recruiting trips when, it was just him and, well, I guess somebody else, that is the thing you have to deal with. And if you're Auburn, you're going to have to look like hypocrites to do it with your Auburn family, blah, 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 all that. But I think given everything they've dealt with and the negative press they've been dealing with, I don't think they would care at this point. So we'll see. But we have to talk about another coach right now. We got to talk about Coach Bruce. Coach Bruce, who just led the Pee Wee Rams to a, what do we call it, national title, league title? It was a league title for sure.
Yes, we're going to call it a Pee Wee Super Bowl in NFL flag SoCal.
This is 5-on-5 flag football. Everybody can go out for a pass. One pass rusher coming from 10 yards away. Is that right?
That is correct.
So you were not going to be a coach, but multiple emails came through saying, essentially, we're going to have to cut kids from the league if we can't get enough coaches. And you stepped up because you are that kind of dad.
No, I was pretty reluctant to do it, in part because I didn't know almost any of the kids. This is like 20 minutes away from where we live, 25 minutes. So the leagues my son was in, I knew a lot of those kids and had a better feel for it. Also, it's like you said, we're going from 8-on-8 where there's blocking and line play to 5-on-5 where it was more wide open. I'm just like, I don't even know what to do defensively on this. And so I was, really hesitant. Plus, there's another aspect of it of involvement where I'm like, I don't know when we practice, all this other responsibility stuff that I'd been an assistant coach, but you don't have to be the responsible one with that. And so I kind of shrugged my shoulders on it. And then finally I was like, all right, I got to do this. And then coming out of the draft in our first practice, I'm like, oof, we're like the Bad News Bears here. And that my biggest,
my favorite's the draft. When you first of all, somebody takes all the kids that you had intended to draft because they were part of a similar friend group. You draft a kid because you're looking at his weight.
Stop you there. When I got to the point of the story where there was a draft, I was like, what? Like, is that I had no idea. It's your responsibility to draft your team like you're the GM.
That is fair. I think that's pretty standard in a lot of places. Now, it was a little different with this draft, at least to me, and this was the first draft I'd sat in, but was that there was players, as Andy said, where first of all, there were some teams that were kept intact who were from the year before. So those players aren't in the draft. And then they're not eligible to be in the draft, essentially. And then, you have a list of names. It's height, weight, the 30 time they ran, and how far
combine, which you guys left the combine because it was taking too long.
We left the combine. We were there for over an hour. Like, we got to go. And so we didn't. So, I'm sitting there thinking, I knew of a couple of kids. I didn't know them personally, but knew a couple of kids from the other league we played in. And then there were baseball players that, like, my son was in this league, and there were some really good baseball players. I had no idea how they'd be as football players. I have a dad buddy who his kid wasn't in the league, but he knew of a lot of the baseball players and knew, he was on some similar teams. And so I got, he gave me some feedback on some of them. And then when I went in there, my list of like 11 guys that I was looking at turned into, I had basically one available to me. And it was like, I walked out of there feeling really stupid.
Well, my favorite is you make your first pick, and then they're like, this kid has a brother, so he's on your team too. I don't think when Les Snead is drafting for the Rams, the picks they don't trade away, that somebody goes, Yeah, that guy's mom's gonna have to drive his brother to practice too, so we're gonna put him on your team too.
Yeah, and I'm sitting there, I'm looking at the 30 time, and I'm like, the one kid I'm drafting is big, he's heavy. So I'm like, hopefully this is my Dontari Poe here. And then as I'm home, I'm thinking, this kid is about the same height as my son, probably runs around what I think my son would have run based on some of the other kids. And he's 40 pounds heavier. That's a lot of weight to pack on what I'm thinking is a second grader, but I was like, we'll see. And then when they showed up, the two brothers were early. I found out that they actually weren't twins, which is what I assumed. And my first round pick was actually a kindergartner. And so I was like, it didn't quite go as I thought. Now, those kids were great kids. Like the older brother was super smart and almost like too smart for his own good. At one point, I remember like one of our players scored a touchdown and he came over to the ref and he was like, wasn't that flag guarding, which would be like stiff arming or whatever? It's like,
oh, yeah, you slap at the flag. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, Dane, we're good. You don't need to like go convince the ref that we should lose points because you think one of your teammates was basically flag guarding or whatever. And
your player too honest, Bruce. I love
honest, but like that one kid, like, so both of those kids were our centers. The one kid was pretty much the starting center, and the other kid, his brother, was the backup. And at the last game of the year, when we played in the championship, we were down one player, and because he had a baseball tournament, so we were kind of shorthanded. So it meant the older brother was going to have to play some cornerback. In addition, it was a hot day. And so we really, had to lean on the younger brother too, to help out with a lot more play, a lot more reps. And those kids and the parents were awesome. Like, that was the best thing I could say is, like, the kids did everything I asked. Like, when people read the story, if they haven't yet, there was a couple plays we put in. One was 92, which is a Leach, air raid kind of staple.
Crossing routes. Leach's reasoning
because
them. Little kids get confused.
So this crossing route, part of it, for people who know it, and it's funny, Neil Brown at West Virginia texted me, and I was like, do you guys still make the receivers slap hands cross? That's how tight they have to be. And he's, yeah, we still do it to this day. And when the first time we ran it, because I was like, all right, we need like a man beater where it's just like, in case, like, I'm thinking everybody's going to play zone. But at some point, we started seeing people try to play us man. So I was like, all right, we're going to end up using this. And we repped it. And the one, I didn't realize until we also, this is not going to probably sound great either, Ari, but we filmed all of our games. We didn't film practice, but we'd film our games. And sure enough, like, that kid was doing everything we had coached him to do. Even if he didn't rep it that much, he would do it in the games. And I was like, that's awesome that this kid's attention to detail was that good.
That's amazing. My other favorite is you had basically invented a play because something happened by accident. Is essentially the same story of at Glenville State back in West Virginia when Rich Rodriguez was the head coach as a 29-year-old or whatever. And Jed Drenning, his quarterback, tripped and accidentally invented the read option mesh. You guys basically accidentally invented like an inverted Statue of Liberty play. That's incredible.
Yeah. So, like, I think it was the second game. And the one kid we knew of in the league before was a really good player. And he was mostly our quarterback. Like, so we would have him be the quarterback, and my son was the quarterback in red zone and with running the slow mesh. But like, so this kid was going to give my son a handoff, and it was basically just a run to the right. And unfortunately, he turned to the left and opened up to the left. And my son kind of hesitated for a while because he was like, all right, that's not supposed to how this go. And the kid had enough wherewithal to spin around and backhand with his right hand my son the ball. My son grabbed the ball and he just sprinted and outran the defenders into the end zone for a touchdown. And after the game, we have one parent who is a college coach, and he was at the game, and he said, hey, what was that misdirection play you guys ran? I'm like, well, it was an accident. Preston, our quarterback on that play, turned the wrong way. I said, but I think I'm putting it in. I have, and so we started practicing it. And it was interesting is like, he could do it, but it was never as effective as the first time he did it because he really sold it going to the left.
Yeah.
And so, as you said, it looked kind of like a Statue of Liberty. But what I ended up finding out, again, and I mentioned this a minute ago, is like we ran slow mesh from Wake Forest. Now, Dave Clawson and
I told you Dave Clawson was coming back around in this podcast.
I had said like week 2 after, like, it worked. The first game we hit a big touchdown run on. The second week we ran it 3 different ways, and after the second week, I texted Dave, who I don't know that well. I know him, I know him a little bit.
Well, you're his favorite reporter now.
Yeah. I said, by the way, we put in slow mesh and it's working. And I told him, he started laughing. And so I called him. I never said to him, hey, how do you guys read it? One thing we did do, like JT O'Sullivan, who was a former NFL quarterback or backup, he had done a breakdown of the slow mesh. It's like a 14 minutes online thing where it's a lot of all 22. And O'Sullivan says on there, I don't know exactly why they're reading it this way or why the quarterback went here. And
the rules are not made available.
They are not. And nor was I expecting Dave to, Dave never told me any, like, this is how we read it this way or whatever. But like, it was interesting because my son and I sat there, like, my kid's obsessed with football. He watched a ton of them running it. So he had a good feeling, at least for the timing of what it was supposed to look like. And so even when it was like, when he'd pull it, like, we got to the point where he was reading a defensive back. And so he would kind of know that's my cue. But it got to the point where when after the season, we had our conference meetings were in Scottsdale. I sat down with Clawson. I have some of the video on my phone. He's just laughing. And I told him the play you're talking about, like the accident play that we ran that turned into our spin draw, what we called it. And he was like, yeah, this is the same side hand. He's like basically describing this play that has come up now. And he's talking about, well, the 3 techniques here, the 5 technique. And as I'm going through it, I'm like, all right, well, I don't get it. Like, I don't understand that degree of it.
I was going to say, I was watching the video of this, and you actually sent it to me when it happened. We had a play my favorite play that we ran in high school was something called 32 scissors. And it was a misdirection where the quarterback would open up at the opposite side, but very quickly switch hands and hand off to the fullback coming through. And you brought the offside guard, crushed the defensive tackle nearest him, slipped the play side guard and tackle to crush the linebackers. And as the tackle, it was a blast for me because, high school D tackles don't know to stop you when you do a rip move on them. So that means there's a linebacker who's looking in the wrong place and not seeing you coming at him. And I love that play. And so when I saw you guys running that, I was like, oh my God, it's 32 scissors, but they don't have a line.
Yeah, there was a lot of interesting things, like, and also you can get carried away, which I'm sure I know I did too, but like where there was stuff we'd practice. And the one thing I wanted to do is we were going to rep the heck out of plays at practice. And there was a couple of times where we would do this thing where it was like, hey, let's try this. And we had a game where somebody gave us a hard time with, like, they were timing up the snap really well. And so we started to mess with snap counts. And then it was like, let's try this, where basically we had 3, the kids who probably touched the ball the most. And I was like, all right, we're going to have 2 different signals. And one's going to be baseball teams and one's going to be football teams. And if I call out Dodgers, this is where we're going to run. If I call out Seahawks, or I call out Rams, or I call out Raiders. And so, the kids did it pretty well, but I'm like, whoa. When I got home, I was like, I can't do this. This is just too much, where I'm like, calling
just don't
out.
Say Cardinals.
Yeah. Or Expos. If I like get in my own head where like, these are
Who are the Expos.
Yeah. At one point I remember, like, we had a couple of the families over Memorial Day way after the season ended. And one of the moms, of the kid who we, like the last kid on our team, because we were down to 8 kids, she was like, I texted him pointing to the husband. She goes, what did you get us into? They're awful. We might not win a game. And I was like, you know what? I actually thought that too. And that was the practice. You should have seen it before your son showed up, kind of thing. That, and it's just like, it's just a fascinating little rabbit hole you can go down. The biggest thing I think I took away was that kids take your kids at that age, at least, really take their cues from the adults. And so if you're really positive with them and you're just like not overly emotional at times, especially when something doesn't go right, they'll probably respond better to it. And like our kids and the parents were awesome, and it was just a real fun experience. And no matter, what happens in a different season or a different, league, I feel like we'll always have kind of that where it was kind of like, it was just really sweet.
Well,
Did you get rings?
No, there's gonna be no rings. We did after the first game, one of our players had said, "Coach, who gets the game ball?" And I was like, I can't give anybody the game ball. They only gave me 4 balls for the season. We have 9 games. So I thought about that at the end of the year, and we had a banquet, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to go online, and I bought a bunch of game balls, and I just, signed, an individual message to each kid. Cause I was like, lots of kids are going to get trophies and stuff from the league. And I was like, at the end of the day, some of these kids are throwing the ball in the street, and, it's probably not going to matter. But at that point, I was like, I want something kind of like that'll feel special for this, that they'll have, and maybe they'll keep it.
I will say that while I was reading that story, like I was super interested because coaching a team sounds like something I could never do in a million years, especially with the logistics and stuff. But there were a lot of very sweet moments too about just like, as I'm new into parenthood myself, of spending time with your kid and, being out there in the car rides and on the field and stuff. And I just wanted to let you know that it was like a really enjoyable thing to read. And I'm happy that you had that experience.
Speaking of sweet moments, I do think we need to introduce another person to the podcast. We've talked about her quite a bit on the podcast, but I think it's time for you to hear her voice. Ari, let's have Liv Wasserman make her podcast debut.
So she just had her first words this week, and I got it on camera.
That is a blazing hot take about Michigan State recruiting from Liz Wasserman.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Like, they're going into Georgia?
This is going to be amazing. So, Bruce Feldman, thank you so much for joining us. I do think if you have another season like this, you're probably going to be in line for a Power 5 job. So just be ready. I hope your agent is ready to field all the calls. But what a debut.
Thank you very much. It was, I don't know how much there's going to be more from this or whatever. I think we just kind of caught a little bit of lightning in a bottle with, the mix of kids and everything like that. It was just fun. So it was like, Ari, I would tell you the same thing that I felt. I could never have seen myself saying, I'm going to be the head coach, not just because, you don't think you can do it. It's just like, there's a burden of adulthood responsibility that comes to managing 10 kids. And you're like, oh, I'm going to
aren't yours.
Whatever. Yeah. And so you never know. It's like, but the thing I would say is like, I am so glad it worked out this way in terms of just, the experience I had with, because ultimately it's like your kid, but then you see the kind of connections you make to other kids. I've had parents reach out to me through, in the comments of the story, talk about like relationships they've had or kind of bonds maybe they've had with some of the kids they may have coached in Little League, and now they see them as adults in their town. And it's just like, I was like, wow, I never really thought about like that, but that's a really cool thing.
Well, it was a fun read. And again, if you have not read Bruce's story, if you're not subscribed to The Athletic already, get your butt over there. You can click on Bruce's story and subscribe there. You can go to theathletic.com/Andy Staples, subscribe there. $1 a month for your first 6 months. You will not regret it. Bruce, Ari, thank you so much. Let's all, I guess we all got to get back to parenting now. Talk to you later.